Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Lindsay Morlock. Lindsay is a gifted intuitive, a breathwork practitioner, hand analysis, and inner child advocate. She left a corporate job as a chief operating officer and moved across the country to pursue her passion of being a spiritual entrepreneur. As featured in the New York Times, Lindsay's unique approach to healing bridges both consciousness and spirituality to supercharge our healing pathways with the most important relationship we will ever have. That is the one with ourselves. Without further ado, I'm going to bring Lindsay on right now. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi, how are
Hi.
you?
I'm good. You look great.
Thank you. So do you.
Oh, thank you. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us here today. So Lindsay, I'm very intrigued with your journey because I just left my corporate job too, like
Oh,
in April of 2023. And
okay.
so a chief operating officer, that's a really high up there position. So I would just want to dive right in and have you share your story on how you transitioned out into the corporate world and embarked on your spiritual journey slash spiritual entrepreneur journey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into some of this. I think for me, some people have these, massive awakenings where it just kind of happens overnight and it's right, almost like they're drinking from a fire hose and it happens. And mine just wasn't like that. Mine was like the story of Hansel and Gretel and following the trail of breadcrumbs, one after the next after the next. And so for me, I think, growing up, I had a very good childhood. I grew up in a fairly affluent town. And as much as, I lived in a safe community and I didn't need to want for anything, I didn't always feel like I belonged. I always had this sense within me that, I just didn't quite fit in. And I couldn't ever really reconcile that within me. And so I was very good at sports. I got good grades. I was a good student. I sort of threw myself into the achieving kind of mindset. And as life would have it, when I was probably 13, I guess, 12 or 13, I had a incident of sexual assault on a youth group retreat. And that really, I felt like set the foundation for the trajectory of the rest of my life in the sense that in hindsight, I can see that that really was the setup for what I most needed to learn on this spiritual journey. And so, what I ended up doing to deal with that trauma was I ended up becoming a binge eater and I really numbed my pain through binge eating. I put on a good front for people. I really pretended that I was fine, even though I felt this profound sense of anxiety and depression inside. Although, as a high school kid, I was not aware that that's what I was feeling. We throw around those terms much more now than we did when I was in high school. And so as a result of that incident, I experienced a lot of rejection around, people either not believing that it really happened, people asking me not to speak up or speak out about it because of their personal relationship with the person. I lived in a very small town, and so I did know that news would spread like wildfire if I were to come forward with it, and I was really scared to speak up. So, with that in mind, I shut my mouth. This is kind of where I feel like I learned to suffer in silence. Don't share anything, don't show anyone that you're in pain, just pretend everything's okay and maybe, you can kind of fake it till you make it. Except by the time I got to college, that's when I felt safe enough to start exploring some of the trauma. And for me, the abuse kind of fell into, at the time, what we would have called a gray area, where some people felt like, oh, yeah, that's definitely wrong. And other people were like, is it so bad? Right. But all I could really rest my laurels on was the fact that this was really traumatizing for me. And that was not validated by many people. And so I left feeling like, how can I feel like this impacted me at the depth that it did, but other people are kind of telling me like, it's not really that big of a deal. Like, why? I don't understand why you feel that way, right? So it led me to really stop trusting myself. Maybe there's something wrong with me, that I'm internalizing this situation the way that I did. And so I really started beating myself up and punishing myself. And because I couldn't find any evidence in the outside world of in the form of books or other teachings where someone could state my experience and explicitly say this was wrong, I really was left feeling like I don't know why I internalized this the way that I did. And it really that was very damaging to me, to not be able to validate this very traumatic experience that I had. So that, I think, and what eventually led to me avoiding dating like the plague. I avoided men, I avoided dating, I had no interest. And I also was binge eating, right? And so I was numbing my pain with food. And instead, because I was so ashamed of the binge eating, and I was so ashamed that people my age want to date, they want to, that I wasn't doing any of those things. I threw myself into being an achiever with my work. So when I came out of college, I did some counseling and therapy in college and started to explore some of this stuff and why I was eating and starting to develop that self-awareness, but not really seeing any kind of creation of happiness within me. I still felt this void. I still felt this emptiness. I still felt deep shame. And so after college, I went right to graduate school to get my master's degree. I was pursuing a career in higher education and student affairs, so the student services side of a college campus. And I really loved working with the students. And my first job, I was actually working with victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse on a college campus. And it was very confronting, right? It forced me to really look at my own trauma. But what was interesting is I started comparing my trauma to other people's, meaning, again, minimizing my experience. Well, yours was way worse than mine. So again, you don't have a right to feel the way that you feel about this, because clearly look at how much worse other people have experienced, right? And so I loved the work I was doing. I loved that I could turn this incident into something meaningful to help other people, but I was still really wrestling within myself around, like, I don't know how to reconcile this pain, right? So I kept eating and I just kept numbing the pain. So by the time I was in my first job post-graduate school, I was working in higher education in Boston, and I loved the people I worked with, but it was Boston for me, and my experience living there was what I call a rock bottom moment. I was so depressed. I was topping the scales at nearly 300 pounds. I was incredibly unhealthy. I was only 26 years old, and my blood work was not good. My blood pressure was not good. I mean, it was very clear on every level that I was not happy, and my body was reflecting that. And I remember someone taking a picture of me and just looking at my eyes, and my eyes they just looked like the life was gone. And I was at a point in my life where I didn't really want to live anymore. I'm like, if this is how life is going to feel, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not interested. And so I knew I needed to get help, and I needed to get help quickly. And so that's when I really found a therapist in Boston who could really start to help me, who really started to validate the experience around the sexual assault that I had, and that it was a big deal what happened to me, that it wasn't to be minimized. And she really helped me to start to accept that what happened to me was real and worthy of that attention. And so the conclusion I ultimately came to, I wasn't in Boston very long. I realized that in order to really change my life, I felt like I needed to move back to New Jersey. My family was there. I had a great job opportunity surface there in higher education, and it was in a different functional area of higher education that allowed me to feel like I would be able to have more work-life balance. I was working lots of nights and weekends in student activities, and I was going to be shifting to an academic advisor position that would have been more 9 to 5, right? Which is unusual in higher ed. So I decided to up and move with the intention of getting my life back on track. And that's what I did. I threw myself into my job. I continued to get promoted in this new job. I lost 100 pounds within the span of 18 months. I was working out, I was healthy. And at the end of that weight loss journey, I was still miserable. So I really experienced being, eating all of my feelings and being miserable at a heavier weight, and then losing all the weight, which I thought was going to solve all my problems. And I still wasn't happy, right? I felt better in my own skin. I looked better on the outside. My clothes fit better, but I really wasn't feeling much more confident. But during that period, because I had lost the weight, I did allow myself to start dabbling in the dating world. And I met someone with that, it wasn't really, in hindsight, we weren't in any kind of relationship, but there was a courtship process that led me to believe that it might lead to something. And so when that inevitably didn't work out, I was in such a shame spiral of, this is my fate. I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. This is never right. Good things are not going to happen to me. I just continued to beat myself to a pulp and punish myself. I was in the car driving home from work as I was in one of these shame spirals, and I was sitting at a red light when all of a sudden a guy comes from behind me and rear ends me, literally thrusting my car into three cars ahead of me. And I really believe that this was Spirit's way of thrusting me forward, quite literally forcing me forward, because in that moment, I ended up having a herniated disc on my spinal cord that I needed to have surgically removed, but I could no longer, focus on my shame and being in that spiral, because now I had something real to worry about, which was my physical health, right? And so what happened was, about a week or two after that accident, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, hey, I just went to this workshop where someone taught me how to read your own hands. This is right up your alley. You've got to come down here. Let's get our hands read together. And so I think a couple weeks later, I was on my way down to Washington, D.C. to get my hands read. And this person, I was at a particularly low point, and this person just saw me when my hands were read. And especially when she told me what my life lessons were. So one of my life lessons is around feelings of guilt and unworthiness. And when she told me the bit about the unworthiness, it was like everything just clicked. And so here I had deeply resonated with these feelings of low self-worth and low self-esteem. And I just thought that's who I was. I just believed all of these stories about myself. But in talking to her, she said, no, Lindsay, this isn't just what you've come in here to spend your lifetime learning about, to exalt into basically its most loving form, which is to see my own worth, to see my own light source. And I was like, you mean this is not a life sentence? Like, I have a choice in the matter here? And that reading changed my life, because she moved me from a place of feeling completely powerless to feeling empowered to change my circumstances. So I really credit that reading with my initial awakening. And I started working with her as a spiritual coach. And I was so moved by the information she gave me and how she was able to help me based on my hands, that I was like, I need to learn how to do this for others. So I spent a couple of years getting my own certification. And after that, there's you're moving, as you're learning how to read hands for others, you're really learning about the hands through your own soul's journey, right? And understanding how to interpret hands based on how you're moving through different lessons and your purpose. And so that was a big catalyst for my own awakening. And then fast forward a couple more years, I found myself on a spiritual retreat in Sedona, and that's where I met my spiritual mentor. And she's the one who taught me pretty much, I mean, she's taught me so almost everything I know, I feel like on a consciousness and spirituality level. And it's what moved the needle the most for me in terms of my awakening and my healing. And so she channeled a program called the Divine Family Program, which I also now teach. And she channeled this program, and it's a program to help your inner child heal the wounds of your past so that you can create a different future. And so when I was going through the hand analysis process, I knew that I would love to not be in a corporate job. I knew that I would, love to be able to work for myself, but I didn't have the confidence that I would be able to do it. Even though I was highly successful in a career capacity, I always had this doubt that if I were doing it for myself, I wouldn't be able to make the same kind of magic that I do when I support other people. So I always kind of had that in the background. And it wasn't until my coach and mentor, Tina Provenzano, took me through this particular program and all of her teachings, honestly, that helped me to connect with my own power and taught me, most importantly, the importance of our emotions and how to process emotion so that we can align with our truest self so that we can move forward and do hard things. She taught me how to connect with my own spiritual support team because no one's guidance for you is better than your guidance for you. We're all on different paths. And so as much as people want to say, do it this way, do it this way, do it this way, you always have to filter this information through your own guidance system to understand what your best path is. And so I know that if I had not moved through this program, I never would have been able to leave my corporate job. I would have been way too fearful. I would not have had any tools or coping mechanisms to move through the fear to be able to understand what the next right step was. So I really credit that whole experience and process. And this is the work that I still live by today. I mean, I live every single life walking this talk, which is why I'm so passionate about doing it for other people. But during I was a chief operating officer and I was really good at that. I am really good at that type of work. And there was something fulfilling about being able to be in a support role, making other people look good. I've always been good at that. But there was just this feeling inside of, no matter how much my job accommodated me being able to do new things and, express my creativity. And they even let me bring hand analysis into my work. I mean, so they were incredibly supportive, right, of me. And yet I just felt lackluster, about the job, about what I was doing, the impact I was making. It just wasn't fulfilling. And so, and that had been my experience. I'll be happy when. All through my life, I think a lot of us fall into that, right? I'll be happy when this, I'll be happy when this. And then you get to the corner office with the title and you're like, and now I'm still unfulfilled. So now what? Right. And so that was when I realized it took me about 4 years to make the transition. But because I allowed spirit to move me through the transition in a very guided way, my transition could not have been more smooth and seamless, as opposed to just being like, I'm quitting my job, I'm starting a new life, right? It wasn't that dramatic. Spirit really showed me what I needed to heal to be ready to make this leap. And I know that at the point that I made the leap, it didn't feel like I was jumping off a cliff. It felt more like I was jumping off a curb, right?
Wow. Well, that helps. Jumping off a
Yeah.
curve.
Yeah. Now that doesn't mean it hasn't been a rocky transition in learn, because now there's a whole new set of lessons, right? The entrepreneurial journey, as I'm sure you know, it's going to bring up all your stuff, right? And so, but that to me is part of the work in being an entrepreneur, is healing yourself. And our businesses are a reflection of who we are, of what our vibration is emitting. And when people focus on their healing and allow that to be the priority, everything else kind of falls into place. So I'll pause there. I feel like that was a long story,
Wow.
but
No, I really love your story. What a profound journey. Wow.
yeah.
Well, as you were talking, I just felt like your story is really validation that we must process our emotions. because
Mhm.
if you don't, you just kind of like go down in a downward spiral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our emotions are not good, bad, right, or wrong, but they're intuitive messages from our soul, and we're not taught that, right? Like our emotions are giving us really important information, but our society teaches us to go to our mind to think our emotions, not to feel the emotion in the body. And I think this is the shift that we're starting to see on the planet with people, I'm sure, starting to be more and more familiar with somatic work, right? But that's feeling the sensations in the physical body. And that's a lot of what I do with the inner child healing, right? Like if you are triggered or you're activated, that's how you know your inner child is not okay. That's activating a wound within her, right? If you're afraid, if you're angry, if you're that's your inner child like tugging on your shirt, being like, Mama, I'm not okay up in here, right? And it's a call for us to really tend to that.
So, question, how, you talked about inner child. So, how do we know when we experience emotions in life? Is it always the inner child, or could it be, I'm angry at that person because that person did something to me, maybe victim mindset? Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
So I still feel like it comes from the inner child because you're being triggered or being activated because there's a wound, there's an active wound within you. And when that wound gets poked, so it's not that there might not be something in your adult life that's getting triggered, but when you are triggered, that is your inner child saying, I'm not okay. And the reason I believe that strongly is because as I've worked to heal myself and worked to heal certain wounds that my inner child has, and the work, this is a lifelong journey, right? The work, I don't feel like the work is ever done. That said, you know, as I've healed things with my inner child, the things that would have triggered me a while ago, they don't trigger me
Mhm.
anymore. So that's how I know she's healing. And so when we I really believe that anytime you are triggered, right, it's because there's an active wound within her. And being able to heal the inner child is a beautiful process because I think it brings us closer to finding our peace. Now, the other thing I want to say is, the ego is our inner child's protector. So our ego mind goes on in protection of the inner child. So your ego might be the one, like you're saying with the victim mindset, your ego might be the thing that's actually triggering you. But once you're triggered, your inner child, right? He or she is hearing every single thing you say. So even if it's the ego that pokes you, the ego can get the inner child's upset really going as well.
Mm.
So there's some intricacies in, I think, how it all works. But ultimately, when our ego is going on, it's because there's a wound that it's trying to protect your inner child from, right? So when people, let me give an example. If we find ourselves in the blame, shame, victim game, well, you did this and you did that, right? We always need to be looking back at ourselves, right? Why are we placing blame outside of ourselves? Well, it's because there's something within us that's unhealed that is calling for attention, right? But it's the ego that drives us to blame, shame, right? Play this victim game because it's trying to protect our inner child from any hurt or upset. But if we're able to really get the ego out of the way and look at what is the wound, what is the pain we would actually have to feel, right? If we didn't allow that ego mind to jump in and create stories, that's often what people are really afraid of. Like, what is the
Mhm.
pain I would have to feel, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about healing your inner child. Can you share with the audience, like maybe a couple techniques on how we can activate healing within our inner child?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that's really important with any kind of healing is, the spirit world works based off of intention. And so we first have to really set the intention to be willing to see the truth of any situation. And a lot of times, I'm just going to be honest, myself included, sometimes we don't want to see the truth, right? We want to stay in our own little delusional, mind, because the truth might be hard to hear in some regards, right? So, and I've fallen into that many times, and our ego will block and block and block us from the truth, because if we get to the truth, we get to shift a pattern that's not serving us anymore. And the ego wants to keep us stuck, because being in the same place and being stuck, even if it's painful, it's still what's known. So the ego interprets it to be safe, right? So first, we have to be willing to see the truth of a situation and have a genuine, like, heartfelt desire to want to heal certain things within us, right? I think the other thing is, and you can find plenty of meditations online for like meeting your inner child, but the inner child is this very real person, right, inside of us. And we don't give most people, I know this is a buzzword now that's up and coming, but a lot of us don't know they exist. Number one, no less give them any kind of attention. But one of the things that people can do at the most basic level to start helping to forge that relationship with their inner child is talk to your inner child. Talk to this little person like you would talk to your own child or a niece or a nephew or, some other little being. One of the things that I think can be really helpful, pull out a picture of yourself when you were a little girl and ask yourself, when you are beating yourself up or punishing yourself or being hard on yourself, look at that picture of that little person and be like, would you ever speak to that little person the way you're talking to your adult self? I know when I did that, the answer was a resounding no. I would never talk to a little person, like a little girl, the way I talk to myself. And that was really helpful for me in starting to shift my own self-talk, because I was like, wow, your inner child is hearing every thought you think. And so if we wouldn't allow someone to abuse a child that way, why are we allowing ourselves to abuse ourselves in that way?
Yeah.
Right?
Great point. I recently had a download, I think it was a couple of days ago, because I think honestly, at this time, I'm working on healing my inner child as well.
Yeah.
And I had a download about looking through some old pictures and finding, a baby picture of myself and putting
Yeah.
it on my
Oh,
study
that's so
desk.
funny. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the idea, right? Like, I mean, whatever's going to help you connect with the fact that that energy is very real within you. And so, I think the picture is a great start in connecting with that inner child. And then from there, you have to be willing to feel your emotions to help your inner child heal, because if you're upset, if you're angry, if you're not willing to feel that, we're basically sending a message to our inner child, your pain is not important. I'm not dealing with those feelings. Now, I know it's not as simple as that, because we've been conditioned to think, a lot of people are like, well, I do process my emotions. What they mean when they say that is they're thinking their feelings. So if you're thinking about all the reasons you're depressed, if you're thinking about all the reasons that you're angry, you're thinking your feelings, you're not processing them. Processing your feelings really requires tuning into your physical body and locating the sensation of your anger, locating the sensation of your sadness, right? So that might feel like my blood is boiling if we're angry, or you'll hear people say, my heart is so heavy if they're grieving, right? That's feeling the feeling. And so to help the inner child heal, we want to validate her pain. We want to say it makes perfect sense that you feel this way. Anybody would feel this way given the circumstances. We want to soothe, right? It's going to be okay. I don't know what the answer is right now, but we're going to get there. We're going to see the truth of this, right? So we can give ourselves these loving statements. We can validate, we can soothe, and we have to understand how to process and release our emotions so that we can come back to a place of neutrality, so we can understand what the message is that spirit's trying to tell us with that emotion. And that's really how we help the inner child heal.
Yeah, wow. So this is like really profound wisdom that you're sharing. Because I really think a lot of people are going through inner child wounding issues right now.
Mhm.
And when people act out, like you say, or when they're
Yeah.
unhappy, they're depressed. It's all about inner child wounding.
Yeah.
And and I'm so happy that you're sharing this today to give people some techniques on how to
Yeah.
start the inner child healing.
Well, I think it's hard for some people to initially dive into inner child work, especially if they've had really good childhoods, because I think people either judge that if they had a great childhood, they shouldn't have any wounds, or they feel like they are blaming and shaming their parents. And the goal of any inner child healing is not to blame or shame anyone, right? So I want to put out there that I come from the perspective that your parents are always doing the very best they can from where they are with what they have, but they were wounded by their parents, who
Right.
were wounded by their parents, and so on. And so, this is where that term ancestral trauma really comes from, because these wounds keep being handed down unconsciously until we bring conscious awareness to our healing. And so, I think it's so great that we now have all of this different knowledge surfacing about how to help our inner children heal, because number one, that was my fastest pathway to healing. But also, I just feel like anybody can do this, right? Like, our wounding is never our fault, but it is our responsibility to heal.
Yeah.
And so it's really important for people to understand that this doesn't need to be painful. It doesn't need to involve a lot of suffering. It just needs to involve a willingness to heal and to see the truth of your patterns and why we're operating in the ways that we are.
Thank you for this information. So let me shift now to your business. So let's talk a little bit about the programs that you offer to the collective. You talked about your hand analysis
Yeah.
sessions. Let's talk a little bit more about the Divine Family Program.
Sure. Yeah. The Divine Family Program is my signature program. It's a 8 to 9 week technically program where I teach people how to connect with their own spiritual support teams. I teach them tools and techniques to get very specific information from spirit. A lot of times people think like, oh, well, I'm not psychic, I can't talk to my guides. Yes, you can. Anybody can do this. So that's, I like to debunk that myth, because people can learn how to do it even if they feel like they're not psychic. That was my journey. I didn't think I have any intuitive gifts, and so and here we are, right? So, teaching people how to work with their spiritual support teams, I help people to learn how to reconnect with their inner child, help teach a very specific technique for how to process your emotions, how to get that very specific information from spirit about the message, so that you can move forward on your healing journey from both a spiritual perspective, but it's about being able to heal in the fifth dimension as opposed to healing in this third dimension. And that's what the program is really geared towards, helping people to understand, how do we heal in the fifth? And because there is a way that we can really play things out with the spirit world, so that we don't have to play out all of these wounds with people here in our 3D reality. And it's a much safer place to be able to play these things out, because it's only coming from a loving place. And we don't get all of the drama of the 3D. The 3D healing is also much slower, right? Because we're
Right.
bound by space and time and certain people coming into our experience. So, this is the program that I live my life by. I live every day by the tenets of this program. And so, this is what literally shifted my whole life and why I feel so passionate about teaching it to other people. So I actually have just been teaching it kind of like under the radar. It's not even fully on my website yet, because people usually come to me for hand analysis or breath work or some other intuitive reading, and then end up filtering into this program. But it's my passion. I really love teaching people how to do this, because the results when people work this process, it really works.
So I think our audience will be very interested to know, how can we connect with our guides? How do we know that they're responding to us when we ask for assistance?
Yeah, so they're always around. They're basically just waiting for you to reach out to them and connect with them. And so, for some people, right, their spirit's going to work with you the way you're most receptive to getting information. So if you're someone that dreams a lot at night, they might come through to you in dreams. If you're somebody that receives a lot of information auditorily, maybe you hear messages through songs, or maybe they're coming through from other people giving you hear the same message 3 or more times, and spirit might be saying, hey, pay attention. I get a lot of messages through animals or billboards or angel numbers that I'm seeing on license plates, right? I also use, you can see me swinging a bit, I use the pendulum to connect with my guides, and I use my pendulum with oracle cards in order to get very specific information from spirits. I would say when people are just starting out, just ask spirit, say, hey, I really want to develop a relationship with you, more of a relationship. I want to get to know you. Can you give me a name? And spirit will work with you. This can be really fun. I'll never forget. I said to spirit one day, it was getting close to my birthday. And I said, I think you should wish me a happy birthday. Like, how are you? And I was just kind of playing around with spirit, like, how are you going to do this? And I kid you not, within an hour, I got on a Zoom call with a client, and she popped up on my screen, and she had a happy birthday background, virtual background. She said, I'm so sorry. I don't even know how this background just showed up, and now I don't know how to get it off. And I just burst out laughing because I'm like, that is spirit through and through, right? Like they are
Wow.
going to find a way, if you're receptive, to get through these requests. So we can ask for it. We can ask for that relationship with them, and we need to give spirit permission to intervene in our lives.
For me, I see a lot of 1111 numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I see them, I know like they're around because
Yeah.
yeah, there's a whole backstory on how this 1111 number came up, but that's for another day. It's a long story. I want to touch on your audience discount. You have a special
Sure.
gift for our audience?
Yeah. So if people want to do a full life purpose hand analysis reading with me, I've created a discount code for $50 off a full price reading. And so if they enter the code SOUL50, they can go into my website, purchase on my website. There's a place to enter the coupon for a full, hand analysis reading.
Okay, great. I'll put that in the show notes. And where can people find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so the primary place would be my website and signing up for my newsletter because everything goes on there. So my website is www.lindsaymorlock.com. It's LINDSAYMORLOCK.com. And I'm also on Instagram. Lindsay_Morlock is my handle. I'm sort of on Facebook, sort of not. Social media isn't my favorite thing, admittedly, but I do try to post my things on Instagram and my website. So
Okay.
that's probably the best way.
Wonderful. So we have a couple minutes left, and I have a signature closing question that I ask all my guests. So here is the question. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the guides on this one and just bring
Wonderful.
through whatever they would like me to share. And the first thing they're saying is you're going to be noticing this mass awakening happening faster and faster. The energies are coming faster and faster onto the planet. And so people are going through some deeply profound, and they're saying in somewhat heavy experiences, because it is catalyzing the awakening for the collective. That said, they're saying the best thing that you can do for humanity is to focus on your own healing. And the reason for that is because as you increase your own vibration, as you increase your own frequency, you are actually helping to heal the collective frequency of the planet. And so they're saying this is not to say that we don't want people to do advocacy work and actively, right, contribute to society in the ways that they feel called and guided to do so. However, the best thing that they can do is really work on healing themselves, because the ripple effect is so profound that they're saying we can't even see the impact that ripple has from a vibrational standpoint. And so That's the advice, is to really focus on your own healing. They're also adding to get really curious about why you show up the way you do. Why do you show up in certain relationships the way you do? Get curious about the things that activate you. Get curious about the things that trigger you, and be open to the different ways and possibilities that can all heal. They're pointing me back to, we are either resonating with love or we're resonating with fear, but we cannot be resonating with both love and fear at the same time. And so they're saying this is why it is so crucial to be processing our emotions, so that we can return to that place of neutral, that we can return to that place to see our world through the lens of love, not through the lens of fear.
Wow, wonderful. And I give thanks to your guides. And who is your guide? Is it one guide or many guides?
So I've got a team of people on the other side, but the person that came from, his name is David. So I cycle through guides, at different times. Different guides come in to help me with different things, but this is David.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. So do you hear them? It seems like you hear them.
It's a combination of things. I do hear. They also flash me to certain, like visually flash me to certain things in my experience or knowledge that I have. They'll point me into different directions. And I also get a lot just kind of like downloaded to me. Like it's just like a knowing. So you kind of use all the senses in that.
So I just had a download, and I want to tell you, I would love to have you back on to
Sure.
discuss this specific
Okay.
topic.
Oh, I love that. I think it's so fun helping people to develop their intuitive gifts, because, I use the term, but I don't even like the word gift, because it makes it seem like it's something special that
Hmm.
is bestowed on like a select few people. And it's not. It's an ability, and anybody has the ability to develop it. Now, not everybody is going to want to develop it. Not everybody is going to even be conscious that they have the ability to develop it. They don't, maybe even have the desire to. But for those who really like feel called towards it and desire, absolutely, it's something that can definitely be developed.
Wonderful.
It's just a muscle. Yeah.
So when you do your sessions, do you channel your guides for your client?
Yeah, I can't separate it. So anytime someone's doing a hand analysis reading, if they're in a breathwork session, if they're in the Divine Family program with me, you get all of me. And so if my guides are bringing through information, they're going to get whatever my guides are bringing through.
That's wonderful. So, Lindsay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today, and you will be back. Okay.
All right, sign me up. I'm good.
Cool. For everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.